about it. 4 members of Congress, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, join us. And finally, reaction to that and the rest of the week's political news with our analysis team of Gergen and Shields.
Funding for the NewsHour has been provided by PepsiCo. Every day we enjoy people being cold to us, cutting us up, getting fresh with us, tearing into us, and calling us chicken. In fact, the more people do it, the happier we are. PepsiCo. And by AT&T. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by the financial support of viewers like you.
The Middle East Peace Conference adjourned today on a bitter note, with Israel and Syria trading accusations of terrorism. The parties to the conference also failed to reach agreement over where to hold the next phase of the talks, direct bilateral negotiations. But talks on that process will continue over the weekend in Madrid. The day began with sharp words from Israeli Prime Minister Shamir. His sharpest were reserved for Syria.
These days, Syria is the home of a host of terrorist organizations that spread violence and death to all kinds of innocent targets, including civil aviation and women and children of many nations. I could go on and recite a litany of facts that demonstrate the extent to which Syria merits the dubious honor of being one of the most oppressive tyrannical regimes in the world.
Syria's foreign minister and the head of its delegation, Farouk al-Shara, reacted angrily to Shamir's speech. He abandoned his prepared text and launched a personal attack on the Israeli prime minister.
I shall just show you, if I may, a photograph, an old photograph of Mr. Shamir. However, why was this picture distributed? It was distributed because he was wanted. He himself recognized that he was a terrorist, that he practiced terrorism, and that he helped in the assassination of Count Bernadotte, the UN mediator in Palestine, as I recall, in 1948. He killed peace mediators.
Secretary of State Baker later chided the conference delegates for their intransigence. He said they'd failed to deal adequately with the human dimension of the Middle East conflict. He adjourned the meeting with a stern warning to the delegates not to abandon the process they'd begun over the past 3 days in Madrid.
It's an important start, one that opens new opportunities, but it is only a start, and that is not enough. And you must not let this start become an end. Because if you do not seize this historic opportunity, no one else can, no one else will, and no one will blame anyone outside your region.
In Madrid, Charlene Hunter-Galt reported that Baker might issue invitations to subsequent talks without prior commitments from the parties to attend. She said Washington might be a compromise site for the talks if the parties fail to agree on a site on their own. We'll have more from Charlene after the news summary. There was more real fighting back in the Mideast today. Israeli warplanes and gunners attacked Shiite Muslim villages in South Lebanon, but no casualties were reported. The attacks were apparently in retaliation for guerrilla attacks on Israeli soldiers earlier this week. And in the Israeli-occupied territories, Palestinians opposed to the talks clashed with police for a 3rd straight day. Judy?
Back in this country, the Labor Department said the index of leading economic indicators declined 0.1% in September. It was the first drop in 8 months. The index predicts economic activity 6 to 9 months in the future. In a separate report, the unemployment rate rose 0.1% to 6.8% in October. The Labor Department said it was due to massive layoffs of construction and factory workers. House Speaker Tom Foley said the figure showed that the economy was not recovering and an extension of unemployment benefits was needed. He said he hoped such a bill would be ready for House action next week. House and Senate negotiators last night agreed to a compromise defense bill which puts the B-2 stealth bomber program in jeopardy, making it unlikely any more of the radar-evading planes will be produced beyond the 15 already under construction. The The bill also transfers money from the defense budget to the Soviet Union for humanitarian aid. That provision was criticized by several conservative Republicans and defended by House Armed Services Chairman Les Aspin.
The possibility of social chaos in the Soviet Union because of food and medicine shortages this winter represents a new kind of nuclear danger in a country with nearly 30,000 nuclear weapons. Thus, this bill, this conference report, makes available to the President up to $1 billion in defense funds for emergency humanitarian aid to the Soviet people to help keep the nuclear lid clamped down.
This is absolutely outrageous. Let's be clear. The United States is in a recession. We have millions of unemployed Americans. Congress can't pass an unemployment bill to help them. We're fighting over that. And now we're going to give a Soviet military complex a $1 billion unemployment package.
Senators today put off indefinitely a vote on a comprehensive energy bill. Critics of the measure said it favored the oil, natural gas, and nuclear power industries. They particularly opposed a provision to begin oil drilling at an Arctic wildlife refuge in Alaska. Supporters of the bill said it was necessary to reduce U.S. dependence on foreign oil. Also in Washington, Clarence Thomas took the final ceremonial steps to becoming a Supreme Court justice. He repeated the judicial oath in the Supreme Court chamber before the other 8 justices and invited guests. He had taken the same oath privately last week. Later, he appeared on the court step for the traditional photo opportunity with Chief Justice William Rehnquist.
In Moscow, the Russian parliament today overwhelmingly approved Boris Yeltsin's radical economic reform plan. The lawmakers' action will abolish price controls on all but the most basic goods and privatize thousands of state businesses. The plan also gives Yeltsin broad new powers, which he said were needed to assure the reforms were carried out. 13 survivors of a plane crash near the North Pole were rescued today after spending almost 2 days in sub-zero temperatures and an Arctic blizzard. The survivors were found huddled in the wreckage of a Canadian military transport plane which crashed late Wednesday night with 18 passengers on board. That's it for the news summary. Just ahead, the Middle East Peace Conference. Washington begins to argue about the economy, and Gergen and Shields.
We begin tonight with the Madrid Peace Conference. Today marked the end of the first formal phase of the conference, which took 8 months of U.S. diplomatic effort to put together. But rather than a peacemaking session, today's meeting took on the aspects of a schoolyard brawl. Charlene Hunter-Gault has been covering the conference to the NewsHour. Here is her report.
The spark that appeared to set off today's verbal firestorm came out of an interview last night on CBS with the Syrian foreign minister.
If you want to compare Saddam Hussein with anyone in the region, it would be with Prime Minister Shamir. Both men are intransigent. Both have despised the UN resolutions. Both occupy other people's territories. Both are intransigent. Both neglect the world public opinion. Both, they feel that they lived in the past. They don't see these tremendous, important, recent changes in Eastern Europe, in the Soviet Union. The analogy is there between Prime Minister Shamir and Saddam Hussein, but not between Saddam Hussein and Hafez al-Assad.
This morning at the Royal Palace, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir struck back.
Syria's representative wants us and the world to believe that this country is a model of freedom and protection of human rights, including those of the Jews. Such a statement stretches incredulity to infinite proportions.
Foreign Minister al-Sharaa retaliated swiftly.
He himself recognized that he was a terrorist, that he practiced terrorism.
Prime Minister Shamir had already left for Israel to observe the Sabbath, but the Israeli delegation sat in stone-faced silence. Until this vitriolic exchange, the atmosphere within the palace had been tense but calm. Delegates had reserved their personal attacks for press conferences and briefings. But with this morning's acrimony, relations between Syria and Israel appeared to plummet to a new low.
The accusations of Syria leveled against Israel as a terrorist state could be, I suppose, funny if they weren't tragically obscene.
Egypt's Foreign Minister Amr Moussa quickly jumped in and told the feuding parties to hold their fire.
Old arguments and archaic strategies should be left at the wayside the moment we leave this conference. We have listened, especially today, to some passionate speeches, which manifest once again how acute the conflict in the Middle East is, and how that change in attitudes, change in concept is badly needed.
Later this afternoon, the co-chairman of the conference went to great lengths to distance themselves from the feud, trying to end the conference on an upbeat note.
Can you please tell us what your feeling was after you heard Farouk al-Shara deliver his speech this morning? Was that the type of speech you expected to hear in this conference, and did it play any role, in your view, in the outcome, the inability of you to announce the continuation of the peace process?
It will obviously come as no surprise to you that I will not come in here and characterize the speeches or remarks of any of the parties. We will be continuing to work with them to try and move the peace process forward. And so I don't want to say anything beyond what I have already said, both in my speech at the conference and in my opening statement here. I've made the point for a number of weeks that you should expect, I think, to see the parties stake out some maximum positions, and that is not to be, that should not be unexpected or should not be a surprise.
After she filed that report, I talked further with Charlene. Charlene, what do you think the feeling is there now at the end of this first few days? Did these people come here just to stage a hate television show, or do the possibilities of real progress remain alive?
Well, I think the hope for real progress remains alive, and I think that certainly U.S. officials have said that they feel not necessarily a sense of victory, but a sense of accomplishment. Secretary of State James Baker and others in the U.S. delegation have been liberally quoting Woody Allen, saying that, 90% of life or some percentage of life is showing up. And I think the fact that, although the journalists kept looking for deal breakers with every question saying, well, is this a deal breaker or is this going to break the conference apart, the fact that the conference proceeded from beginning to end without any walkouts and with little more than verbal vitriol, I think left the U.S. officials and others feeling somewhat hopeful that something may have gotten started here.
Tell me, on the venue issue, analyze that for us. Why is it so important, and what is really at issue in where these bilateral talks are going to be held?
Well, I think Israel very much wants to have the conference in the region because that's where all their capitals are, and that's where, if the conference takes place in the region, it would mean that Arabs would come at one point to Israel, which would mean a more concrete manifestation of Arab recognition of the state of Israel. And for just the opposite reasons, the Arabs are not willing to go there yet. I mean, this becomes a matter of negotiation when they recognize the right of the state of Israel to exist. They want some things for doing that. And so they would prefer a much more neutral ground for the bilateral meetings. Madrid is certainly preferable to most of them. Secretary of State Baker is pretty strongly rumored to be prepared on Sunday if they haven't agreed to say, all right, I'm going to issue invitations as he did to this conference for you to come to Washington. And those of you who want to come, as he said about this conference, can come. And those of you who don't want to come don't have to come.
So is Mr. Baker's feeling that they will, someone will come, that they will settle down and do some bilateral negotiations in spite of all this resistance?
Yes, my own feeling, based on the information that I've gotten from Arabs as well as U.S. officials and Israelis, is that this process is going to go forward. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take a long time. The one thing that some people are concerned about is if there's too much lag time between the end of this conference and the next phase of the bilateral talks, then this process may have to start all over again. And I think that people feel that unless you can capitalize on this momentum, then it really does look bad. But I found, just even though Secretary of State Baker was very sober today, I found a lot of room for cautious optimism that something can be worked out on Sunday.
In other words, although referring back to the rumor that he may try and impose Washington as a place, just go ahead and arbitrarily invite them to Washington. In other words, although the U.S. and the Soviet Union have promised they're not going to impose solutions, they are still leaning very heavily on the matter of procedure, aren't they? I mean, they're right in there pushing and shoving.
I think that particularly with this group of people, you have to be really careful about the language you use. Language is so very important in these kinds of negotiations, and I think that the United States would not use the word impose, but everybody, I think, whether they are admitting it or not, really, really, really want the United States to remain involved in this process, as the President and Secretary of State have said they are prepared to do.
Does Mr. Baker have any Arab help in this process?
Yes, I think that that's one of the things that is giving a little more weight and a little more confidence to everybody as they proceed. The Secretary has relied very heavily on Saudi Arabia in the person of Prince Bandar, who was here as a part of the Gulf delegation, and also the foreign minister from Syria, Ambassador Musa, whom we had on the program the other night.
From Egypt.
And I think that it's from Egypt, yeah. And that's right, from Egypt, and it's not just a matter of getting them to put pressure on the other Arabs. I'm not sure that that's exactly the role that they're playing, but I think that the role that he has tried to use them in, from everything that I can understand, is to get him to understand what the Arabs are saying, what kinds of problems they're having, because, as I said, semantics, language is very important. The Arabs deal in and speak in a very different way than the Israelis. It's often been said, and the Arabs themselves say it, that often their language is much rounder. It's much more, for Westerners, much more elusive and not as direct, whereas the Israelis and other Westerners tend to be much more direct and much more legalistic and precise. So the Secretary has relied very heavily on advice from allies like the Saudis, which is a byproduct of the Gulf War. The Saudis owe them this. It's widely believed. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the Egyptians, who also were part of that process.
Does the U.S. now believe that after all this very strong rhetoric, after 2 days of very bitter speeches back and forth, that these same people can now come back together, having got that out of the way, and do constructive business together?
I think they believe that. When I spoke with U.S. officials at the end of the conference today, they were exhausted, and I asked them if this thing had thrown them for a loop, all of this vitriol, and they are saying to me that this was what they expected. It's not a whole lot different from what they expected. They didn't have really great hopes. I think they may have hoped that there would have been more handshakes and more exchanges. And by the way, there were some exchanges that were not necessarily visible to the public eye, and those little things were hopeful too. But they're telling me that basically what has happened is what they expected. I think they hoped to have announced a venue today, and I think there was a little disappointment on that. But basically they're saying the thing went just the way they expected, that they felt people needed to state their positions, needed to get them out on the table, and the parameters of the debate have been established now.
Well, Charlene, thank you very much indeed. Bye for now.
Thank you, Robin.
Still ahead in the NewsHour, politicians weigh in on the economy and Gergen and Shields. Next tonight, we turn our attention back to the U.S. to persistent bad news about the economy and the brewing political battle over what to do about it. Figures released today, unemployment up and leading economic indicators down, capped another week of evidence of an unusually weak recovery from the recession. Even Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan Monday said the economy in recent weeks had turned demonstrably sluggish. Other figures this week show September's home sales off by 12.9%, factory orders off by 1.7%, and the fiscal 91 budget deficit at a new high, $268 billion, a jump of nearly $50 billion since last year, with estimates that next year will be far worse. The economic news has prompted politicians in both parties to propose a number of remedies, most involving tax cuts for the middle class. Meanwhile, the Bush administration is reported divided over what, if anything, to do. That is the question we pick up now with 4 members of Congress. California Democrat Leon Panetta chairs the House Budget Committee. Vin Weber of Minnesota is a member of the Republican leadership in the House. Tennessee Democrat Jim Sasser chairs the Senate Budget Committee, and Pete Domenici of New Mexico is ranking Republican on that same committee. He joins us from a studio on Capitol Hill. Gentlemen, the first thing I want to try to clarify with all of you is what state is the economy in? We had the president saying yesterday and then again today that we've turned the corner, we're headed for recovery. On the other hand, you have Speaker Foley saying, no, we're still in a recession. You have economists saying we're still in a recession. Senator Sasser, which is it?
Well, I think we're on the verge of a double-dip recession. The indicators are all very poor. Unemployment was up today, as you indicated earlier. But we have 8.6 million people who are unemployed. We've got 6.3 million people who are partly employed. That is, they've gone from full-time jobs to part-time jobs. 1.1 million have quit looking for jobs. So we really have about 13% of the workforce that's unemployed. Judy, we have 1 in 10 people in this country that are now on food stamps. This economy is in trouble.
Senator Domenici, which is it? Are we in a recovery or not?
Well, it's difficult to say, but I would think that we need to energize the economy. I think the real question is, how do you do it? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't make the aftermath worse than when you start? But there's no doubt that that this failure to recover is lasting too long. And we ought to find some ways to, as I indicated, to energize it with some activity. If we can find a way, we ought to get on with it.
Congressman Panetta, which is it?
Look, there's no question we've got a very shaky economy on our hands. All you have to do is look at the indicators that you just showed. Every one of them is down. We thought that there was a modest recovery taking place sometime during the summer. What's happened is it's flattened out, and I think right now there is a real danger that we could go into a double dip.
Congressman Weber, do you have any disagreement with that?
No, the economy's terrible. The economy's been terrible for a couple of years, and there's no solid evidence it's going to get much better. You know, the unemployment figures are not the only indication of how bad this economy is. Real estate values are falling for people who have jobs. That's their major asset in the case of most middle American families. Business starts are at record low levels. The poor are getting demonstrably poorer, something we used to argue about, and now we're all agreed that it's happening. I mean, the economy's bad.
All right, let's talk now about some of the proposals that at least 2 of you have been involved in putting together. Senator Sasser, in a nutshell, you're talking about a package of tax cuts, I think primarily aimed at the middle class. Tell us, again, in a nutshell, what it is you're proposing and why you think it ought to be aimed at.
Well, what I'm proposing, Judy, is a $30 billion tax cut, carefully targeted to hit the middle class. If we're coming out of this recession, it's going to have to be consumer-led. And the middle class doesn't have any money, and they're the ones that would spend this tax cut. I also target a portion of the my deficit or my money in the direction of deficit reduction, $25 billion for deficit reduction, and also a portion for infrastructure rebuilding. Now, the important thing, this is all paid for by 5% reduction in defense spending over 5 years.
On top of the cut that's already been proposed, is that
That's
right?
correct. That's correct. But the cut that's already been imposed was made prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Soviet military threat.
Congressman Panetta, as a fellow Democrat, is that a good proposal?
Well, I think it's one of the ones that's worth considering, but I think we have to be very careful that whatever we do with regards to tax incentives, in fact, are targeted, that they don't add to the deficit, and that they work. My greatest fear right now, frankly, is that we ought not to do anything that undermines our effort to try to reduce the deficit. And
well, you're saying that Senator Sasser...
Senator Sasser pays for his with defense reductions, but a lot of the proposals that are out there basically would cost anywhere from 20 to 30 to 50 billion dollars, and there's nothing said about how you would pay for them. As a matter of fact, the approach is just tear up the budget agreement and let's go ahead and do these tax cuts.
Congressman Weber, I'm going to ask you about your proposal in a moment, but at this point, what about Senator Sasser's proposal to aim these tax cuts at the middle class?
No, I think some of Senator Sasser's proposals are good. I'm glad he's I'm glad he's addressing the right problem. I don't think it's nearly ambitious enough. And Leon Panetta, my good friend, and I mean that sincerely, has opened the debate that we really need to have tonight. These guys, who are both good, decent, honorable public servants, along with some Republicans, led us to the deficit reduction agreement a year ago. Since that time, the deficit, 5 years, has increased by $1.3 trillion, and the economy has gotten weaker. Now they're telling us again, we must once again focus not on economic growth, but on deficit reduction. It's the wrong approach, and if we embody that approach, this economy will get only sicker in the next year.
Senator Domenici, what about the Sasser proposal, that general approach of going into the defense, cutting the defense budget more in order to get money back to the middle class?
Let me first say, because I'm fearful we won't get this in this evening, we ought to pass a bipartisan unemployment compensation extension, and I hope we address that a little more shortly.
Yes, there is apparently now agreement on that between
No, there really isn't. That's what I wanted to tell you, that early story is given way to an argument in the House on their committee, and it's fallen apart. The Democrats had a big argument in the committee, not leadership, and it won't come up until Tuesday. But let me suggest for Vinny, frankly, I'm really sorry that you are taking up the line that the agreement last year caused this recession. That is the 5-year budget agreement, and the small taxes on cigarettes and alcohol and booze, that didn't cause this recession. For the first time, it put a 5-year plan in place that might have gotten the deficit under control. But if we have an emergency, we can take things outside of that budget. If we had time, we'd explain to you why the budget went up rather than down. We expected it. The RTC had to be paid for. But let me go now to Senator Sasser.
That's the savings and loan.
Yeah, let me take the Senator Sasser's. Frankly, as Senator Sasser says, this is a tax cut aimed at the middle income. If it's Senator Benson's proposal, it isn't aimed at the middle income. If it's other than that, I'd like to see it. But frankly, you can't be all things to everyone. What you really ought to be doing is leave the defense alone for another day. We just got through cutting it. We can't cut it for a whole year. And we ought to target some tax items that'll get some consumer spending. Why don't we take the IRAs that are in place and permit them to take out $2,000, grandmas,
these are the individual retirement accounts.
Yes, and spend it on automobiles or heavy appliance items right now. I think that would be a good one. It wouldn't cost anybody anything.
Right. Let's go back to Senator Sasser. What about that?
What about what, Judy?
Well, his saying that we don't need to do what you suggested, that you open a hornet's nest if you do that. What we ought to do is try to stimulate buying cars and houses.
Well, that's what a middle-income tax cut targeted carefully to middle-income taxpayers is all about. Now, the tax cut that I'm proposing would cut off for those who make $100,000 or above, and 68% of it would go to those who make less than $50,000. These are the consumers who would spend the money and stimulate this economy. The danger is that we're going to sit on our hands and let this fall off into a double-dip recession, and then the deficits are going to continue to go through the roof.
Let me just say, I think one of the concerns is what you're hearing right now. I think everyone is concerned about the economy and how to address it. What you don't want to do is to get into a bidding war, in which you suddenly wind up repeating what happened in early 1981, which in fact I think helped lead to the tremendous debts that we have now. What's
what do you
missing?
Mean a bidding war?
Well, we went into a bidding war on a tax cut proposal. Democrats had our tax cuts, the Republicans had their tax cuts, the President has his, and instead of deciding which ones we needed to target, we put everything into one package. What's missing right now, what's really missing right now is presidential leadership on this issue. That's what's missing. If you really want to do something to address the economy, where is the President? The President's only answer to this problem is either capital gains for the wealthy or blame somebody else.
Capital gains for the wealthy?
Speaking of capital gains for the wealthy...
I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I can't believe the Democrats care more about the politics of envy and redistribution of income than they do about the economy of this country. Everybody that owns a home is affected by the capital gains tax. Every small farmer or small businessman in your district or mine is affected by the capital gains tax. The president has correctly said, and liberal Democrat economists agree with this, that if we don't restore a differential for people that invest in economic growth, we're not going to have any economic growth.
Judy, just let me say this. With regard to capital gains, you might make some case for capital gains, but the kind of capital gains the president's advancing, and I expect, I assume my friend Vince is supporting it, 65% of the tax break from that capital gains he's advancing would go to those who make $200,000 and above. Now, these are the same people that were enriched by the Reagan tax policy of the 1980s. That's part of our problem. Middle-class people have no purchasing power.
Why don't you suggest one then, Senator Sasser, capital gains tax?
Well, I have suggested one. In my program that I'm advancing, it has in it tax incentives for small business. Small business owners can hold their stock for a period of time and take what is essentially is a capital gains treatment.
Well, let me
but
say,
it has to be carefully targeted.
Let me
go to Congressman Panetta and then
let me suggest what the problem is, and that's why I indicated that without presidential leadership, all you're going to have is everybody fighting each other over these different issues.
And by the way, what the president said today was that consumers ought to go out and buy houses and buy cars.
The president's answer to serious economic problems is basically to say people ought to go out and buy more, or maybe we ought to give better tax breaks to the wealthy, or maybe it's somebody else's fault. It's either the Fed's fault or the Congress's fault. Unless we have an agreement that we have fundamental problems in the economy, and what we need to do is address A, unemployment compensation, B, make some targeted investments in education, in infrastructure, in research and development, and then do some tax relief and maybe some tax incentives as part of a tight package that doesn't increase the deficit, then we're not going to get anywhere.
Senator Domenici, and then I want to go to Congressman Lehrer.
Could I just say, the way things are now, we try to work together for about 3 years, and when it comes to be a year before the election, I really regret to say it turns into a jungle. And it's a partisan jungle. If the president were to recommend something tomorrow, he would never recommend enough for the partisan Democrats in the House and Senate. If he could ever get anything done, it was probably a year and a half ago, and maybe now, if he got a few leaders to the White House and they sat down together, maybe, but I'm not even sure that we'd get it done, because anything he suggests is out the window. Energy policy, bank policy.
So you think that's an argument, Senator Domenici, for the president to do nothing at this point?
No, not at all. I'm suggesting when he is ready, he ought to be very careful, because he'll just be bid up and thrown away by the Democrats in the Congress.
Let me go to you, Congressman.
He is right. It's unfortunate, but he is right. I still think we have to try. My point to my two Democrat friends here is, look, we need to do something to increase consumer spending. I'm for that. But this recession was not led by a fall-off in consumer spending, and it is not being driven down by that. This recession was led by a real estate collapse. And as you go across this country, you're going to find vacant buildings in every city in this country. You're going to find residential real estate going down. Nothing that my good friends Jim Sasser and Leon Panetta suggested will have any impact on the real estate market.
All you're suggesting is to basically add to the deficit, which I feel was one of the driving elements that brought us to this recession.
We're talking about incentives for investment in real estate
debt
that were taken away by the 1986 Tax Reform Act.
I can't believe that Republicans who usually speak about the importance of trying to reduce the deficit are now taking the charge and saying what you really need to do is add to the deficit, because that's the way to solve our economic problems.
You talked about reducing the deficit a year ago, and today we have $1.3 trillion more debt over the next 5 years as a result of your package.
Were it not for that package, the deficit would be even higher than it already is.
I think you can see here the need for some presidential leadership to get us out of this problem.
But Senator Domenici just said whatever the president proposes is not going to be enough for the
Democrats. I disagree with that.
And Senator Sasser will be the first one on the floor to take him on.
Senator Domenici's right on this point.
I think it's very important that we not get into a bidding war over this tax cut. Leon Panetta is quite right about that. And I think the president will find that Democrats will be agreeable in dealing with what is put forward to get us out of this recession, just as we were agreeable to going to the budget summit with him.
I don't believe that for a minute, Senator Sasser.
Well, I'm sorry you disagree,
I do,
Senator, but I think you're in error on that.
Well,
I'm willing
to let you make your
work with
point.
the President all along on this. We sent him, for example, 2 bills to deal with the problem of unemployment compensation. This is just a very modest stimulus for the unemployed.
He
vetoed both of them. Now we want to work with him again.
Criteria for an unemployment bill that he would have signed. There is not one reason why the Democrat Congress did not send him a bill that he would have signed, which would have kept those checks going, except that they wanted it as a political issue.
And you know what? They're going to send him one that meets his conditions after all these months. They're going to find a way to pay for it so it doesn't affect the deficit.
Make no mistake about it. The president was dragged kicking and screaming to this position. I mean, he has basically said the economy is not in trouble.
No.
Yes, he has. For the last 9 months, he's been basically saying things are great. The recovery is around the corner. We're going to go ahead. He vetoed the unemployment compensation bill on the basis that there wasn't a problem out there. Now he's saying, wait a minute, we do have a problem out there. Maybe we do need unemployment compensation.
Yes, we do.
Why do we have to go through that kind of gamesmanship before we reach what has to be done to solve a problem?
An extension of unemployment benefits from the beginning. You know that. He has always supported a bill to extend unemployment benefits. He hasn't supported the Democrat bill.
The truth is he supported a token bill
a 10-week extension.
That really missed about 78% of those who'd exhausted their unemployment benefits. So he could say, I'm for helping the unemployed. But when you peel that back, you find there's no substance to his bill to extend unemployment benefits.
Could I make a point?
Just quickly, and then I want to go
on capital gains. Let me say to Vin Weber, we are going to, for next 10 days, look at the real estate situation in depth. Senator Dole has asked a few of us to. You might be right, that whereas before real estate had to do with something different, and now it may have to do with the underpinning of the economy dropping out. We're going to look at it, and you might be right.
I believe that. Thank you, Pete.
What's the bottom line in all of this? I mean, despite what very clearly partisan disagreement here, there is no disagreement, as I understand it yet, within each party. There is the president at this point, Congressman Weber, would not be prepared to support your legislation. Is that right?
The president,
you're talking about a capital gains cut plus a targeted
I support more than
tax
that, yes.
credit.
The president and I could come to agreement very easily. Senator Domenici is right on target. The president does care about the economy. The president does think something needs to be done. The president is concerned that if he goes to the Democratic Congress, all we're going to hear is this rhetoric about soak the rich and all that BS, and we'll end up with tax increases, not tax cuts.
So what should the president do?
I believe the president should take the risk and take on the Democrats in Congress and rally the country to an economic growth package.
And Congressman Panetta, what do you think is going to happen?
I think the problem is that we're going to continue to have a battle between both sides, and the president, if he continues to run from the issue, then clearly you're not going to see something happen to try to deal with what is a very sick economy.
Well, gentlemen, I have a feeling this is one we may hear more about.
Yes, you will.
Senator Domenici, Senator Sasser, Congressman Panetta, Congressman Weber, thank you all for being with us.
We turn now to the political fallout from all this with our weekly team of analysts, Gergen and Shields. That's David Gergen, editor-at-large for U.S. News & World Report, and syndicated columnist Mark Shields. Polls show the economy may have an impact on several off-year elections next Tuesday, including the race for the vacant Senate seat in Pennsylvania. Correspondent Kwame Holman has a backgrounder on the Pennsylvania story.
I do, so help me God. Republicans must have been pleased last spring when Democrat Harris Wofford was appointed to fill the Senate seat left vacant by the death of John Hines. Wofford, Pennsylvania's Secretary of Labor and Industry, was a political unknown, having never run for public office. He looked vulnerable against any number of potential challengers in an upcoming special election. But against Pennsylvania's best-known politician, a Wofford defeat looked almost certain.
Our colleague and our very able Attorney General, Dick Thornburgh, has informed me that he expects to become a candidate for the U.S. Senate from
Richard Thornburgh, U.S. Attorney General for the past 3 years and Governor of Pennsylvania for the previous 8, was running again. Thornburgh hoped the people would remember him as the cool, level-headed executive who who began his first term as governor by calming fears during the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident and ended his second term with a state budget surplus.
Good morning, Dick Thornburg.
But recent polls indicate the voters might be remembering Thornburg more as a member of the Bush administration. The stalled economy has caused the president to plummet in the popularity polls, and Thornburg has plummeted along with him. Just a few months ago, Wofford trailed Thornburg by 30 points in some polls, but since has narrowed that gap dramatically. Now, in the final days of their campaign, polls show Wofford and Thornburg in a virtual dead heat.
Dick I think you were the chairman of the President's Domestic Policy Council. Are you proud of what you did in that council and of those domestic policies? Because those are the things that are going to be at issue in this campaign.
Those are domestic policies that I'm proud of and would serve the people of Pennsylvania and this nation if you in the Congress would cease your partisan bickering about it.
Wofford has tried to cast himself as the Washington outsider, even though he is the incumbent and once served as an advisor to President Kennedy. He has tapped into the anti-government sentiments sweeping the nation. Jobs and health care are his big issues.
I can't think of anything more scandalous than that we see emergencies for the Turks, for the Kurds, the people of Bangladesh, and 168,000 Pennsylvanians and millions of Americans needing money that is there, sitting there unused, and he won't sign a bill that will give a helping hand to Americans when we do everything overseas.
Thornburg has responded by linking Wofford to Robert Casey, the current Pennsylvania governor who appointed Wofford to the Senate.
Working people in Pennsylvania are hurting. Unemployment is up and high taxes are driving more jobs away. When my opponent was labor secretary, 100,000 more people were out of work. When I was governor, 500,000 new jobs were created. To get jobs back, we'll revive old industrial sites and fight against unfair foreign competition, like we did before.
If Thornburg wins, political analysts are likely to credit his favorable record and continued popularity with Pennsylvania voters. But a Thornburg defeat could send a much broader message, that the stagnant economy poses a serious problem for President Bush just as he kicks off his re-election campaign.
Last night at a $1,000 a plate fundraiser in Houston, President Bush angrily defended his attention to the economy.
Lately, the opposition up there in Washington says we don't have an agenda. But I've noticed that their agenda for Congress is stopping our agenda for America. They are old thinkers, tired old ideas, and all they want to do is block the agenda that I was elected to perform on by the American people, and I'm a little tired of it. This isn't the way America ought to be operating, and I have this wonderful sense that I get frustrated at times, but I got this wonderful sense that we can change that next year by taking our message that the Congress has been around there too darn long, controlled by the same party, and it's time to change it.
And now to Gergen and Shields. David, how do you read the tone of Mr. Bush's speech last night? What do you suppose is going on in his political psyche?
I think he's both angry and defensive, Robin. I think he's very... the Democrats have gotten under his skin about their claims on the economy. He resents it when George Mitchell yesterday compared him to Herbert Hoover. He resents the fact that Democrats are saying he shouldn't have gone to Madrid for the Middle East conference. And frankly, the president, as we saw in that last conversation, which was so fascinating with those members of Congress in the Senate and the House, you know, some very, very fine people, it's like dropping in on a food fight, which is happening all over this city. I think the president feels he's very much caught in the middle, even within his own party, by people who sharply disagree about what ought to be done.
Mark, is this the speech last night of a president who suddenly feels vulnerable?
I think he feels quite vulnerable. He thought he was quite defensive. George Bush has a very bad political habit of personalizing criticism. He did it again last night in that speech in Houston when he left his text. And I think he is feeling defensive. There is no clear consensus. That emerged from the discussion, but it's also emerged from the deliberations of the White House. And as far as the predictions of economic improvement, as far as economic forecasting is concerned, Robin, the Bush administration has given a new respectability to astrology. They keep telling us that it's better, it's over, it's improving, and then it isn't.
David, realistically speaking, Can this new downturn in the economy make a president who only a week or two ago looked virtually a shoo-in a year from now seriously defeatable?
Robin, I think that certainly 3 months ago, George Bush looked absolutely invincible, and that's why many Democrats decided not to run against him for the presidency. Now, 3 months later, for the first time in his entire presidency, he does look vulnerable. I think he's still the favorite for next year, but if in Pennsylvania, Dick Thornburgh, who actually had a 44-point lead when that campaign opened up, if he can see a lead evaporate practically overnight, then many Republicans are worried the same thing could happen to George Bush. There are Republicans in this city today who believe, in effect, that George Bush is running as a domestic agenda about the same way Richard Thornburgh has run his political campaign in Pennsylvania.
Mark, how do you fit the Pennsylvania Senate race into the new political context?
Well, I don't think there's any question, Robin, that Harris Wofford, the appointed senator who's never run for office before, running against Dick Thornburgh, who was kind of the heavyweight champion of Pennsylvania politics, has totally dominated that campaign. There's a great test in politics, and that is whose issues you're discussing and debating the last week. With George Bush in the fall of 1992 wants the discussion, the debate to be on foreign policy, on international leadership, because that's Bush's strong suit. If, in fact, it's on national health, Bush is going to be in trouble. That's exactly what's happened in Pennsylvania. You saw Dick Thornburgh in his spot talking about a tough trade policy. That was Wofford's issue. He's talking Wofford's issue. He spent the last week on health insurance, which is the issue that has really catapulted Harris Wofford to an even position in that race. Anytime in politics, you don't sound good playing the other guy's harmonica. No. And that's exactly what's happened to Dick Thornburgh.
Now, over the weekend, apparently, they're each going to spend about $1 million on a lot of attack commercials going back and forth. Suppose, David, that the former Attorney General squeaks through. Does that mean that health care is not a big issue next year? And supposing he's defeated, does that mean that suddenly health care is a major presidential issue? What does it mean?
Well, there's going to be a temptation on the part of the White House, Robin, if Thornburgh wins, to draw the conclusion that the problem that Thornburgh had in his campaign was Thornburgh, and the fact he didn't run a very effective campaign, not that he didn't respond well to health care, and he didn't have an agenda. Already there are people in the White House and around the president drawing that conclusion, and in effect are saying, let's just stay where we are and try to sell what we have a little better. There are other Republicans, Vin Weber, who was on this program earlier, is a good representation of that, who believe what the Republicans need is a growth package. They need to address the questions of health care. They need to go in with them on the offensive in the 1992, and that's the lesson from the Thornburgh campaign. The lesson should be this should be a wake-up call. Shockwaves ought to go through the Republican Party. Weber's making the argument, for the last 2 years we've had a lousy economy. What Republican in the White House is saying that?
Yeah. Mark, up till now, the polls have shown that when you ask people about health care, they are concerned about it, but when you ask them what the list of their major concerns is, it comes fairly far down. Now, is this race showing that this could become a major national issue?
I believe so. I think that health care, you're absolutely right, in the past has sort of been out on the side with issues like the environment, as opposed to the central core issues of campaign, which have historically been jobs and taxes and issues that. I think that health care is moving into that second category of people's concerns, and I think that Pennsylvania will confirm that. There's another message for Pennsylvania if, in fact, Harris Wofford does win, and even if he doesn't, he's made such a horse race out of it, and that is that Democrats, to have a chance in 1992, have to run a populist campaign, the sort of campaign he's run, instead of their traditional liberal campaign. And he is most certainly. I remember Lee Atwater, the late Lee Atwater, after 1988, expressed very candidly his fear that the Democrats that year would nominate Dick Gephardt, who he said you could not tag as a snowbelt liberal. And Harris Wofford has been anything but a snowbelt liberal. He's been talking about issues of privilege, that the senators themselves get health care, that the wealthy are taken care of, and that working Pennsylvanians don't. And I think that really is the message for the Democrats coming out of this.
Do either of you have a feeling for the momentum of that race at the moment in Pennsylvania? Do you, Mark?
I think that Wofford's going to win.
Yeah. What do you think, David?
Robin, I talked to a number of Republicans today, and they're absolutely split. There are people who are close to the Thornburgh campaign and say it's turned around since Wednesday night. There are other Republicans who say it's over. Wofford's going to win this race. Let me come back, if I might, to the health care issue. in my judgment, it is becoming the hot issue. Because, Robin, for a lot of people who are about to lose their jobs, the real fear that they're expressing in focus groups is not the loss of the job. It's the loss of health care benefits that go with the job. And that people are terribly, terribly anxious now about not only just being unemployed, but having their whole family exposed to the ravages of
So
being
as
sick.
the anxiety about the economy mounts, anxiety about health care would mount with it.
Absolutely. And it's going to push our politics toward doing something about health care, not next year, but in 1993.
Mark, another thing everybody's going to be watching next Tuesday is this initiative in Washington State to limit the terms of congressmen and senators. How major an issue is that, and what's going to happen if it wins in Washington State next Tuesday?
Well, I think if it wins in Washington State next Tuesday, the shockwaves are going to be universal in the body politic. It is a source of apprehension here in Washington on Capitol Hill. There's a sense that it's a movement that is on the march, and nobody seems to have an answer for it.
Yeah, David, how do you look at the term limitation issue? You kind of heard President Bush refer to it obliquely there in that speech, didn't you?
Because Dan Quayle just referred to it in a speech just before that, coming out for term limits very heavily. Term limits is an expression of the same thing we're seeing in Pennsylvania. It's an anti-establishment, anti-incumbent feeling that's sweeping the country. It's very hot right now. It's very likely to carry in Washington State. It could jeopardize Tom Foley's future in the House of Representatives if the courts find that it's constitutional. And by 1992, we could find as many as 20 states with ballots. And very heavily favored in most of those states. So this is a movement. It's very much like the Prop 13 movement. Remember the anti-tax movement that swept out of California in 1978. Term limits has all the same earmarks of that, and it's like a prairie fire across the country.
Come back to Pennsylvania for a moment. David, if Thornburg loses, if Wofford wins in Pennsylvania, what does that do to the morale, but also the decision of Democrats of some Democrats who may be just watching the presidential race but not in at the moment?
It's an interesting question. It will absolutely energize the Democrats. This race has taken on a significance far beyond Pennsylvania in terms of the way people are looking at it. I think it's going to give Democrats a lot more hope that they can wipe out the big Bush lead, just as Wofford has wiped out the Thornburg lead. I do not think Jesse Jackson's getting into this race. I think he tomorrow is going to tell us he's not going to run for president. But I do think if Wofford were to win this, it would be a very, very powerful incentive for Mario Cuomo to come in and declare himself as a candidate for the presidency.
What does a Wofford victory do in your view, Mark?
I think it does exactly what David has described. I don't know what it does to Mario Cuomo, because Mario Cuomo's public, agonizing self-reappraisal is frankly tiresome to me, and I think growing increasingly tiresome to a lot of Democrats. But I think it does give the Democrats a sense that they can win, that it is doable, and most importantly, that George Bush will not be able to do what he'd hoped to do, which was to postpone any debate and discussion on national health insurance, a real reform of health coverage in this country, to 1993. It's going to be front and center in 1992.
Now, you both heard the discussion among the congressmen about what to do. What do you think is likely to happen in the next few months? Are the White House and Congress going to get together on some kind of goose the economy package or not? Would you say, Mark?
I don't think so. I think that the president has made it pretty clear that he's backing off from any real tax package. I thought that his prescription that people ought to buy more houses and more cars was not only unrealistic, but had a certain ring of blame the customer to it. I mean, somehow if people would just get, up off their duffs and go out and buy a house and a car, this economy would start perking again. But I don't think that George Bush has been able to resolve, as David pointed out, the differing advice he's getting from his own counselors. And so I think that the course that will be followed is that of inaction.
David, if you were a middle-income taxpayer, the ones who were being talked about there, would you advise them to have any confidence that within a few months they would have some more purchasing power in their pockets?
Robin, I think any middle-income taxpayer listening to that last discussion would have to be absolutely convinced this city can't get its act together and is not going to pass anything this year. I don't think it is. I think you'd probably listen to that last discussion and say you probably ought to go pretty liquid in your investments and get out of the stock market.
That's fair enough.
I do think that there's a possibility of having something next year if the economy continues to drift downward the way it is now. There's a very definite stall in the economy. and I think that will put increasing pressure on these folks to get their act together within the next few months. Tom Foley has made it very clear, no action this year on taxes, but I think next year could be a different matter.
So you guys are Wall Street analysts now, too? Can't we leave that for Wall Street Week? Okay, thank you both. See you next week.
Thank you.
Again, the major stories of this Friday. The first phase of the Mideast Peace Conference ended with a bitter exchange of charges about terrorism between Israel and Syria. But signs pointed to a continuation of the talks. In this country, there was more bad news on the economy. The index of leading economic indicators fell for the first time in 8 months, and the unemployment rate rose 0.1% to 6.8%. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Judy. That's the News Hour for tonight, and we'll see you on Monday night. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the NewsHour has been provided by AT&T.